Good morning. Good to see each of you here this morning. And I was just sitting there thinking of the news yesterday. What if you were one of those ones in Hawaii that got a text that says, in 20 minutes, everything might be coming to an end? We're wondering how many people were praying there after they got that text. What would happen if you got that text? Thought you only had 20 minutes to live. Something to think about, because for every one of us, there will be that time when we have 20 minutes left to live. And it's good to have those things taken care of beforehand. This morning we are going to continue our study, our series that we began a couple weeks ago. What are you carrying with you into 2018? And we started out by talking how we need to let go. Let go of those things that we hold so tightly. And we said some of those things are bad things that we need to let go of, and some of them are good things that we need to let go of and let God have control of. And last week we talked about letting go of inferiority. Inferiority, where we're comparing ourselves to everyone else instead of looking at our lives through God's eyes and the possibilities that He wants to do in and through us if we will just let go of those feelings of inferiority that keep us from soaring. And then this morning we want to continue with some baggage to let go of. And another piece of baggage we need to let go of is misunderstandings. Have you ever been misunderstood? Poor Steven got misunderstood last week, and he didn't realize that you would go out there and to sign up. Have you ever misunderstood someone else? There's few things in life that can wound our relationships more than misunderstandings. The lesions that form on our soul are often very painful to heal, and in some of our lives there are misunderstandings that have never, ever been healed. Misunderstandings can occur between people that are hundreds of miles apart, or can occur between people that are standing inches away, face to face. In this culture that we live in of text messages, Facebook posts, all kinds of other social media forms, phone calls, emails, even sermons can be misunderstood. All of them are potential carriers of the blight of misunderstanding that can affect our relationship. In his book, Communications, Key to Your Marriage, Norman Wright gives us an insight into why misunderstandings develop so easy. He said, when you stop to think about all that's involved in getting your message across, it's apparent why misunderstandings often occur. Communication specialists point out that when you talk with another person, there are actually 6 messages that can come through. You're trying to say something, but it can come through in 6 different ways. Look at these. First of all, what you mean to say. But what also could be heard is what you actually say. Another thing is what the other person hears, or what the other person thinks they heard, or what the other person says about what you said, or what you think the other person said about what you said. All right? So every one of those is a different perspective, interpretation of a conversation that took place between you and that person. It's a wonder that we can accurately communicate at all. In fact, doesn't it sometimes feel like this? I know you believe you understand what you think I said, but I'm not so sure that you heard that what you heard is not what I mean. Okay? I know that's as confusing as the person that heard that. Have you ever misunderstood someone? Misread their motives? I'm sure we have all felt we have been on the receiving end of a misunderstanding that we said and they took it out of context. Maybe some of you are right now in the midst of a misunderstanding firestorm that is consuming a relationship that you have with someone else. This morning, I want to say to you, take courage. We can learn and we can grow through those painful times of misunderstanding. And hopefully this morning we can find some help in God's Word. Every misunderstanding develops in some kind of the same way. First, there's an innocent word, an innocent action, and there's been a motive that has been misinterpreted by someone who, based on their faulty perception of what just happened or what was just said, becomes offended by the person that is really innocent. We live in a culture right now where everyone is offended by everything. It doesn't take, anything you do, it seems like someone's offended by that. And that just even exacerbates the misunderstandings that come naturally to us human beings. We want to look at a story in the Old Testament this morning of David. David knew about misunderstandings all too well. Remember the story of David as he was sent to go and visit his brothers who were down with King Saul fighting the Philistines. And they were at an impasse because there was a giant Goliath that was every day come out and defy the armies of Israel and defy the God of Israel. And saying, if send one of your guys to fight me, whoever wins will win the battle. David came to his brothers, and about the time that giant was coming out. And he was like, why isn't anybody going out there to fight him? Why don't we go out and take him down? And you know the story of how eventually David ended up on the battlefield with a slingshot against a giant 9 feet tall and all of his armor and all of his armory. And David takes down the giant with one stone to the forehead. Well, that was the beginning of a giant misunderstanding between David and King Saul. When the king and his warriors returned home after conquering that Philistine army, as they fled after David killed the giant, they were met with an entourage of women who were singing and dancing and singing praises. Samuel wrote it this way. He said, when the victorious Israelite army was returning home after David had killed the Philistine, women from all the towns of Israel came out to meet King Saul. They sang and danced for joy with tambourines and cymbals, and this was their song. Saul has killed his thousands, but David has killed his tens thousands. When Saul heard this, jealousy overcame him, as well as a sense of paranoia that twisted his perception of David from being this good little country boy that had also been serving by playing his harp for King Saul into this power-hungry young upstart who had his eyes on King Saul's throne. Samuel goes on to say this made Saul very angry. What's this, he said. They credit David with 10,000s and me with only thousands? Next they'll be making him their king. And so from that time on, Saul kept a jealous eye on David. Now we all know that God earlier had sent the prophet Samuel to Jesse's house. Jesse was the father of David. and told him to anoint one of Jesse's sons who would be the future king of Israel. And as the process unfolded, David was the one chosen, and he was anointed by Samuel to be the future king. But if you read the book of 1 Samuel, you can nowhere in there find anything that shows David scheming or conniving to get that throne any earlier than when God would say, now is the time. By facing Goliath, all David wanted to do was to stand up for God's honor. It had nothing to do with him. He was just mortified that the God of Israel was being defiled in this way, and no one was doing anything about it. In fact, the king could never have found a more devoted servant than there was in David. And yet, because of Saul's own insecurities and his own lack of faith, Israel's greatest victory ended up rupturing the king's relationship with this young warrior. It was a wound that would fester in Saul's heart for the rest of his life until the day he died. Many Old Testament scholars believe that Psalm 140, which is a lament of David, that it arose from this very struggle that David was having of Saul misunderstanding and then pursuing and trying to kill him. Saul knew that because of his disobedience, and that's a whole other story where Saul disobeyed God and God said, I'm done, that God had left him. Saul knew in his heart that God had left him. And he saw on this young man the anointing of God. And he knew that God was with David and he was not with him anymore. And that scared him to death. Rather than repenting and returning to God, the king chose instead to persecute the Lord's anointed. He turned away from God and turned towards the evil that he allowed in his heart. Someone said, evil people hate those who are being used by God and often try to destroy them. If you've ever had a misunderstanding that turned into mistrust and then had that mistrust turn into hate, then Psalm 140 is for you. Whether you were on the giving end of that or the receiving end of that. David articulates so well the painful experience, captures there his own vulnerability, the apprehensions and fears that he had in his heart, and as well as Saul's escalating imaginings and the relentless pursuit and trying to destroy David. I want to look at this psalm for a few minutes and just see how David sought the Lord through all of this, and how it helped him deal with the runaway train of misunderstanding. Let's look at some of these components that David puts out in this psalm. The first thing that we see is his vulnerability. David's words to the Lord in the midst of this expresses vulnerability. Lord, rescue me. Lord, protect me. Lord, keep me. Keep your hand on me. One of the things that we realize very quickly is that we cannot really protect ourselves from being misunderstood totally. As much as we may try, there are always going to be people that misunderstand what we said and what we meant or the tone of our voice. And that leaves us, in a way, defenseless. It leaves us all vulnerable. We're all exposed here if we have any communication at all with others. And sometimes our instinct is, right away, when we're misunderstood, is to defend ourselves. And to try to make them understand what we meant. Now, there is a sense in which that could be helpful, but sometimes all it does is make it worse. And David was in that situation. He experienced the reality of being completely helpless to change the mind, the opinion of the king that had taken offense at him against something that he had not had in his heart at all and was retaliating against him to the point of trying to kill him for just an imagined wrong. If slight misunderstandings rarely stay slight misunderstandings, think what was happening here when Saul jumped not just to a slight misunderstanding, but to a radical conclusion, misreading David's very character. And Saul's distortion of the truth billowed into an ominous storm of cruelty and evil that consumed his very life. So David cries out, "O Lord, rescue me from evil people. Protect me from those who are violent, those who plot evil in their heart and stir up trouble all day long." When people start with a misunderstanding, sadly, they don't usually stop there. It's not just a little misunderstanding. We usually begin to extrapolate from that and escalating ideas and fantasies and reasons why they would do such and such and why they were acting that way. And if they were acting that way, then it must mean that this is also true. And we begin to do these big mathematical equations of why, because of this little thing, this is true. Too often, those escalating fantasies begin to run a dark course and can begin to consume our soul. In Saul's case, he became violent. Twice he tried to pin David to the wall by throwing a spear at him. And it says from then on, he was bent on killing David. Now that made David a little anxious, a little apprehensive. If you had a javelin thrown at you a couple times, you might just become a little skittish. And so it's understandable that David began to feel apprehensive. And not only was Saul out to get him, but he was no doubt, undoubtedly, he was trying to also get others to see it his way. David, who had been working in the palace, I'm sure just by his character, everybody liked him. And I'm sure that people had a good opinion of him, and he was friendly. And all of a sudden, here's King Saul saying, "Yeah, but do you know what he was like? Do you know what he's doing? Do you know he's trying to take my throne from me?" And all of a sudden, he's spreading these things, and the cancer grows and grows. And David said, "Their tongues sting like a snake. The venom of viper drips from their lips." We have all maybe experienced that, where something just starts spreading and all of a sudden someone said something to someone else and now they can't be your friend. That developed then into persecution against David, with violent, slanderous Saul and his army hunting David down, hunting him like an animal out in the desert. And David had to turn to the Lord, and he found in the Lord his help. Only God could free him from the traps that Saul was setting against him. Only God could deliver him from the deadly end that Saul had planned for him. And he cries out, "O Lord, keep me out of the hands of the wicked. Protect me from those who are violent, for they are plotting against me. The proud have set a trap to catch me. They have stretched out a net. They have placed traps all along the way." Probably few of us have had a misunderstanding that turned so deadly. But we've all had those times where someone that was our friend turned against us. I remember in junior high, down in Grand Cayman, and I had a friend in class. We were friends, all the guys. And then one day, he saw me talking to his I've always said his perceived girlfriend. I don't know that she knew she was his girlfriend, but he thought so. And I was talking to her. And out of that conversation that I had with her, he extrapolated that I was trying to get in on his girlfriend. And what a rupture happened out of that. Nothing I could say could defend myself. He turned all the class against me, and I was an outsider anyway because I was a foreigner, and pretty soon it got ugly. And the only thing that saved me from probably getting beat to a pulp was that the biggest guy in class, the guy that worked out and was as solid as a rock, he was my best friend, and he didn't turn on me. And so that he knew that the guy knew that if he came at me, he had to go through Arlen first. And I was protected. But it was innocent. There was nothing there at all. But that's what this guy saw, that's what he heard, and what he shared, and pretty soon I was a pariah. Most of us have probably lost a friend somewhere along the line, either temporarily or permanently. And maybe that friend has become an enemy through a misreading of meaning or motive that they perceived. So how do we go from misunderstandings? How do we go through those so that they don't destroy us, so they don't take us down, so they don't make us into something bad? Can we grow through those times of misunderstanding? Is it possible for us to come out of them whole? Even through his pain, David held on to his faith in God. It's so easy for us in those times to let go of our faith in those times that we're being persecuted. And sometimes, even in the midst of those times, we find ourselves blaming God in our prayer. God, why did you let this happen to me? Why is this happening to me? Why are they treating me this way? We all have those unfortunate, unfair situations that we have to live through. We need to remember that faith usually is developed through hardship, disappointment, disillusionment, conflict, frustration, failure, and loss. And it's not through sitting in church with stained glass windows and other religious props. Too many times we think that this is where faith is developed, that this is where faith is grown. We learn about faith here and what it is, but it is really developed and grown out there when we're put through the ringer of life, through even misunderstandings. We'll grow the most when we live out our church-nurtured faith out in a world that inevitably misunderstands us. Life is not a fairy tale. And things don't always end up the way we think right. Automatic happiness isn't always the outcome in the issues that we face in life. All we have to do is look at David's life and we realize that's true. So what can we learn from David? What are some lessons we could learn? Here's a couple. First, I see David opens the door for growth by declaring his allegiance to God. So many times in these times of great pressure that misunderstandings can put upon our life, so many times in those moments we pull back from God and say, I got this, I know what to do, I know how to get them, put them in their place, I know how to set them straight, I know how. And David doesn't. He throws himself on the Lord. Rather than surrendering to his enemies and joining them in that despair of the moment, he entrusts himself to the one who understands it all. The one who understands what's in his heart and understands what's in Saul's heart, who sees truth and who judges fairly. And he says, "O Lord, you are my God. Listen, O Lord, to the cries my cries for mercy. What he was saying is, God, you are God, and I am not. And I'm going to throw it all out there for you. Hear my cry. I'm trusting you. I want you to be God. And then he reminds himself of the Lord's protection, that he's counting on God to defend him. It'd be so easy to get right down in the mud and retaliate and say, okay, Saul, I'll get my own army and we'll fight and we'll have this out and we'll take it out there in the desert and whoever comes out, the winner will be king. And I think it's with me because God anointed me, and he could go on and talk all kind of trash. But he didn't, did he? He seeks refuge in God. He says, God, you're my shield. O sovereign Lord, the strong one who rescued me, you protected me on the day of battle. And then finally, David asked the Lord to thwart the desires and the devices of Saul and his army. Lord, I know they're coming against me. I know he has the army of the whole nation behind him, but Lord, turn it back on him. You do it, not me. He says, Lord, don't give the wicked what they want. Don't let their plot succeed. Don't let my enemies be victorious. Make their threats against them fall back on them. May red-hot coals fall on them. May they be thrown into the pit and never get out. May those who accuse others falsely not succeed. May evil overtake violent people and destroy them. And he concludes his psalm by trying to get God's perspective on it. He says, Lord, I know you defend the cause of the poor and the rights of the needy. The righteous will praise you indeed. They will live in your presence. David is saying here, God, I know you will uphold the cause of those who suffered. He said, I know that if I am righteous, if I live righteously, then you will be with me. Too many times the reason why we don't seem to see God with us is because we're not living righteously. We're getting down in the dirt just like the person that's accusing us or misunderstanding us, becoming just like them. But he says, if I'm righteous, if I live righteously, you will be with me. Your presence will be there. And so David said, God, I know who you are, and I am going to trust you. Oh, it's so hard to trust God to work these things out, isn't it? David is saying, we never need feel abandoned. Even during those times when the whole world seems to be set on fire against us, fired by the fuel of some misunderstanding. But the sense that God is there. Not just after the affliction is over and we look back, okay, yeah, I know God must have been with me. But in the midst of it to know God is with me because I am trusting him. I am trying to live righteously. I am trying to be holy in this situation. And I know God is with me and he will be my shield. By transferring our burdens to the Lord, we can know joy in the midst of the storm. David said, in thy presence is fullness of joy. And he said, I can be in your presence because I am living righteously. So if we are choosing to live according to God's plan in our life, then we can know that God's presence is with us because that's where joy comes from. We can have joy in the midst of the storm. As we grow in the Lord, as we walk our life, we're going to encounter misunderstandings. And like David, when he brought down Goliath, sometimes it's in those times when we thought we were being the most altruistic, the most kind, the most nice, and that something is taken and misunderstood. And evil motives are attributed to us. And we too, the sad thing is, will find ourselves, if we're not careful, attributing evil motives to someone else, their words or actions. So is there a way to prevent these relational messes? To disarm them before someone is hurt, before friendships are irreparably broken? I think there is. And there's several simple things here that I just want to leave with you that are just practical if we could put them in place in our lives. The first one is simply this: speak clearly. Well, that seems very basic, doesn't it? But so many times we give vague, unclear, ambiguous messages when we talk. Some of us do that purposely so that we aren't invested, so that we don't have to follow through. So if you make it vague enough, we can maybe wiggle out or say we meant something different. But to speak clearly, I couldn't tell you how many times I have had to rewrite things. And I go through my sermons and I go through them again on Sunday morning before church. I'm always there crossing out this word and putting in a different word, because this word could be perceived differently, or maybe this word is a little easier to understand my thought. And so many times when I write a letter, I rewrite it to try, and I'm sure I'm not perfect at it at all by any means, but try to think, okay, what will they hear when they read this? And in our conversations, to think about, okay, if I say this, what will they understand it to be? To take the time to speak clearly, to think about what we say. This can go a long way in preventing misunderstanding. And then to listen actively. If you aren't sure about what a person meant when they said something, ask. If you're in the conversation and they said something and right away your hackles went up and we walk away, well, I heard what I heard. Maybe if we just say, I heard you to say, is this what you meant? Sometimes spoken like that, no, that isn't what I meant at all. And right away we could diffuse something. So many times in this period of listening and communication, instead of listening to what the person is saying, we are thinking about what we're saying next. And so we're not even hearing what they're saying. All we're doing is thinking about what they're saying. And if they said something that made us kind of get our hackles up, instead of listening, all we're doing is trying to put together the next phrase that's going to come back. The zinger that's going to put them in their place. Or just for argument's sake, the better argument. I'm thinking about that instead of listening to what they are saying. The third thing that can help us is don't jump to conclusions. Someone said that this is the only exercise many people get, jumping to conclusions. However, the relational damage that can be done far outweighs that quick response that we think. I've told this story before, but it's one that has impacted me in my life and my ministry deeply. It was 35 years ago, I suppose, pastoring in Kentucky, and we were pastoring a little church, a church plant, probably 30 people in a little room, not much bigger than the classroom over here. And in that little group of people, we had 4 piano and organ players. And we had an organ and a piano. And so 2 played on Sunday morning, 2 played on Sunday night. Cindy was one of those that played. We were there, a little over a year, and Rebecca was born. And so Cindy said to me, she said, I don't want our baby passed around. I want to sit there and hold my baby. And so when our baby is born, I don't want to play the piano anymore. They can take turns. One of the ladies that was opposite of Cindy was Sister Riley. And Sister Riley was probably, I don't know, at least 40 years older than us. Back in those days, everyone seemed much older. She probably was younger than me. I don't know now. But she seemed pretty old. And when it came time for her to have her turn, she came and said, no, I'm going to hold your baby. You get up there and play. And we were young, and it's our first church, and the next thing we know, Sister Riley was up front playing, or sitting down there holding the baby, and Cindy was up playing. Well, we jumped to conclusions. We knew why. She was just had to be in control, just had to do everything her way, blah, blah, blah. And bitterness and anger began to develop in our hearts. And we didn't care for Sister Riley too much after that. Always, everything she did, we had an angle on why she was doing it. A few months went by, and I got a phone call, and it said, Sister Riley's in the hospital. Went up to see her, and Sister Riley was in the hospital. In fact, she was dying. She had cancer, and she hadn't told anybody. She kind of had it in her mind that if she told anybody she had cancer, that they wouldn't want to be around her, so she didn't tell anybody, not even her family. She had bone cancer, and to play the piano was so painful for her. But she didn't want to say anything, and so the only way she could get out of playing twice on Sunday was to grab our baby and say, Cindy, get up there and play. We knew she had evil motives for doing it. But in that moment, just everything drained out of me. I had misconstrued everything. I had attributed to this woman that was a godly woman all kind of evil motives. And it really crushed me. And it did something to me for the rest of my life that I'm not perfect at it, I'm sure. But I try to give people the benefit of the doubt. That in that moment, I don't know what they're going through. I don't know the reason why. Give them the benefit of the doubt. And then, tying into that, avoid thinking the worst about a person. Some of us find people in our lives that are just deliberately trying to hurt us. And sometimes there are people like that we have to defend ourselves against. But there's really very few people in your life that's trying to destroy you, that are really out to destroy your life. And to keep from misjudging others and exaggerating their flaws, we have to try to think how they think, to learn what is their story, what's their situation. There's a little video that I wanted to share that is funny, and you've probably seen it, I don't know, but every time I see it, I get a chuckle out of it. A lot of misunderstanding. How many of you husbands have ever had your wife misunderstand you? Anyone? No one, not very many are brave enough to put their hand up. But how many of you wives have had your husbands misunderstand you? Huh? A lot more hands there? Yeah. This little video just shows that we're all different, and if we could just begin to understand the other person, maybe there wouldn't be as many misunderstandings.
We're going to start discussing men's brains, women's brains, and how they're very different from each other. Now, I want to start with men's brains. All right? Now, men's brains are very unique. Men's brains are made up of little boxes. And we have a box for everything. We've got a box for the car. We've got a box for the money. We've got a box for the job. We've got a box for you. We've got a box for the kids. We've got a box for your mother somewhere in the basement. We got boxes everywhere. And the rule is the boxes don't touch. When a man discusses a particular subject, we go to that particular box, we pull that box out, we open the box, we discuss only what is in that box. All right? And then we close the box and put it away, being very, very careful not to touch any other boxes. Now, Now, women's brains are very, very different from men's brains. Women's brains are made up of a big ball of wire. And everything is connected to everything. The money's connected to the car, and the car's connected to your job, and your kids are connected to your mother, and everything's connected to everything. And it's like... It's like the internet superhighway, okay? And it's all driven by energy that we call emotion. It's just... It's one of the reasons why women tend to remember everything. Because if you take an event and you connect it to an emotion, it burns in your memory and you can remember it forever. The same thing happens for men. It just doesn't happen very often because, quite frankly, we don't care. Women tend to care about everything. And she just loves it. Okay? Now, men, we have a box in our brain that most women are not aware of. This particular box has nothing in it. In fact, we call it the nothing box. And of all the boxes a man has in his brain, the nothing box is our favorite box. If a man has a chance, he'll go to his nothing box every time. That's why a man can do something seemingly completely brain dead for hours on end. You know, like fishing. Now, they've actually measured this. The University of Pennsylvania a couple of years ago did a study and discovered that men have the ability to think about absolutely nothing and still breathe. You know, they connected all the wires and stuff like that and watched their brain activity, then all of a sudden, I think he's dead. Huh? You know, women can't do it. They can't do it. Their minds never stop. And they don't understand the nothing box. And it drives them crazy. Because nothing drives a woman more crazy or makes her feel more irritated than to witness a man doing nothing. We're going to start.
So, you can see there some of the seeds of misunderstanding are even built right in. And if we can just kind of accept that they're not evil because they do things and think of things different than we, but maybe I just don't fully understand them. We don't understand where they're coming from. We have to understand, go back and think, what are this person that I'm dealing with, what are they usually like? How historically have I interacted with them? Have I seen this behavior that I'm attributing to them? Is that their character? Most of the time, it's not. Those initial misunderstandings. Give them the benefit of the doubt. Try to think the best of them. And then, finally, remember that you're not omniscient. Omniscient means all-knowing. You can't know everything about that other person. You can't read their heart. You don't know the journey that they have been on. You don't know the pain in their heart that some of their actions may have been flowing from. Our human understanding is limited and it's flawed. And so we need to leave the judging to God. Someone said to know all is to forgive all. Let me ask you this morning. We've talked about this and been serious and we've laughed about it. But is there some area of your life that you need to put in these tips into action? Think of the broken relationships in your life. What do you need to do? How do you need to seek to restore? To go and say, there's been a misunderstanding. To humble yourself and admit it. Or if you're the one that gave that misunderstanding, to go and apologize. Remember that God loves both of you. You who has been misunderstood and the person that has misunderstood you, God is the source of truth. He knows our hearts, and we can trust Him with our hearts. Satan loves, I think, misunderstanding more than anything else. It creates more turmoil in the home, in the church, at work, in our communities, probably than any other thing. It also keeps us as Christians from our light shining brightly. We need to get a handle on this. We need to let go of our misunderstandings. Some of us hold on to them so tightly. God says, let me be God. Let me discern the hearts of each. Your job is to live a holy life. Your job is to love, to show kindness, to show compassion, in spite of what you perceive may be done against you. David sought the Lord. I trust that as you encounter misunderstandings this year, that's where you'll start, seeking God and letting go of that which will be a bag around your neck, like a millstone, like it was to Saul. It can destroy and eat away your soul, and we don't want that. Will you stand with me? Almighty God, we thank you this morning that you know my heart. You know who I am. You know my thoughts. You know my motives. You know why I do and don't do certain things. And Lord, other people may misconstrue what I do. Help me to love them anyway. And Lord, when I misconstrue what others do, oh God, check my heart. Help me to be willing to listen to your voice. And help me to rest in you, to throw myself into your arms of understanding, and to know that you love me and you love that other person too. And that I will do everything in my power to be your hands and feet. Father, forgive us for the times that we have misunderstood others and acted upon that. Help us to let go. Help us just very consciously and intentionally today to let go of those things that will burden us down and keep us from being effective this year for you. So we give ourselves to you in Jesus' name. Amen.